Scientific tests have been carried out on the mummies, and what seemed like answers only created more questions. But like all good science, it begins with observation. All we had to do was wait, and the reality of the mummy's origins began to reveal themselves. Initially, we arrived in Peru to record the memorable alleged reveal of a series of mummies we were told were found in a cave in Peru. The world's press, we were led to believe, would be at a press conference in Lima, Peru's capital. However, the origins of the cave in which the naturally mummified bodies were found remained shrouded in secrets, but Thierry Jaimín, president of the Incari Institute based in Cusco, became a halfway house between the alleged discoverers, known in Peru as huaqueros, or grave robbers, and the scientific community. In our initial meeting with him in a hotel in Cusco, he told us of the alleged cave where the remains were found.
Es el sitio.
Yeah, he said one of the more important points is the place where they found that they can't say where it is.
Dicen que hay una energía electromagnética muy fuerte en la zona.
They say in that place where they found it, there is a very high electromagnetic.
Y que no han tocado 10% del
They
sitio.
didn't touch 10%, not even 10%.
Han visto entidades biológicas vivas.
And they also saw live biological células?
No,
entities.
Right.
Y de este tamaño, 40 centímetros,
This size,
y de más de 2 metros,
and 2 meters.
que se han escapado en los
They
túneles.
escaped.
The cave grew into an investigator's enigma, due mostly to the fact that the huaqueros wanted to keep the site secret, as more alleged bodies and artifacts were still being removed. When we began to apply more pressure to reveal the cave, we were told we would end up being shot if we went to the desert, and with such a statement we backed off on our pursuit of the discovery site. But we did learn of particular items that were said to have been discovered within its desert walls. Initially, photos that appeared on our screens through Gaia.com shows an entrance that seemed out of place. But inside, just like Thierry had described, was indeed one of the alleged sarcophagi and other bodies which seemed buried in the dirt. But it was after these initial photos that questions started to arise. Where are the other tunnels that led further into the mountain, as they had stated? Why was Maria, the larger body, buried in the dirt and the smaller ones in the more elaborate sarcophagi? How did they get their cameras to work in a place which was said to have such a powerful magnetic anomaly that allegedly shut down all recording equipment? The obvious sleight of hand came yet again when in late 2017 Peruvian researchers were seen clambering into a natural cave said to be the original location for the mummy discovery. This cave shared nothing with the claims made by Thierry Jaimín in July 2017, and further investigation has led researchers and those with commercial interest to conclude there never was a cave to begin with. As the case played itself out, other claims made about items and entities seen in this alleged cave developed and grew in proportion, such as the claims of a large skull over a metre wide being found and living entities resembling the expired 29-inch body frames which allegedly ran away from the huaqueros as they entered the cave complex and disappeared down other tunnels which led deeper into the ground. Tales of these strange and very bizarre encounters continued to reach the mainstream media, which were particularly fueled by representatives of the Alien Project, also hosted by Thierry Jaimín. This drive to propagate the hybrid hypothesis has nurtured a new and blossoming enterprise, deeply ingrained within the bustling black market in Palpa, a town 25 miles northwest of Nazca, a black market galvanized by Vaquero efforts. It's difficult to actually pinpoint exactly when the illegal trafficking of Peruvian artifacts took place. There are references of such activities during the days of the sugarcane harvesting back in the first half of the 20th century. However, grave robbing really began during the Spanish conquest of the 16th century, when gold fever led to widespread looting of grave sites. Vaqueros are Peru's professional grave robbers. Once news of a discovery of an ancient burial site starts to draw international attention, illicit activities at these sites increase and local looters head to the sites to dig for artifacts to sell to make extra money. Grave robbing has been a persistent pastime in Peru as well as in other South American countries. US officials have estimated the international black market to be worth $1 billion a year in looted antiquities. In 1987, the opening by Vaqueros of a spectacular tomb in the north of Peru touched off a looting frenzy around the country that archaeologists say has increased with Peru's current troubled economic condition. Vaqueros are often feared and occasionally enter into violent shootouts with police authorities. Peru's government officials believe the Vaqueros often work with rich collectors in Lima, who in turn work with international investors and have developed sophisticated trafficking networks for antiquities, illegally exporting an untold number out of the country. There have been a number of museum robberies, and police authorities believe that in the last 3 years these robberies are a result of direct interest and requests from abroad. 2 hours north of Peru's capital city Lima, a dirt road runs off the main highway into the desert, past a chicken farm, and up to a series of rounded hills. At the base of these hills, in an area the size of a football field, the ground is pockmarked with holes, some 12 feet deep. Strewn around are pieces of ancient pottery and fragments of human bones from the Chanche culture, which flourished between 700 and 1400 AD, worthless items left behind. In the holes are the remains of passages and burial chambers that have nearly been demolished. Gone are any pieces that can be sold to tourists, antiquities dealers or collectors in Lima. Also gone is most of the archaeological evidence that would help scientists better understand this complex civilization. Seizures of illegally obtained fossils are also increasing, surpassing 2,200 in 2010, compared with about 800 in 2009, and an alarming estimated 4,800 items in 2018, largely at Lima's International Airport, said Jose Oplin of the Ministry of Culture's Office of Recovery. In 2009, Bolivian customs officials seized the mummified body of a pre-Columbian toddler before it could be shipped to Europe. A dealer was attempting to ship the 700-year-old mummy to a buyer in France. The traffickers were also discovered to have replaced a missing leg in order to increase the mummy's value in the black market. This case sheds light on the billion-dollar market in ancient Latin American artifacts. Presently, the Peruvian government is working to combat this type of illegal activity. Unfortunately, however, they do not have the resources to combat the problem. Even more alarming are the recent Peruvian police arrests of suspects who allegedly drained their victims and sold the liquid as an anti-wrinkle treatment. Peru reacted with revulsion and horror to reports that scores of the country's poorest population may have been butchered by the gang, which was said to have operated out of Huánuco, a rural province between the jungle and the Andean peaks, which is dotted with Incan temples. 2 of the suspects were arrested at the bus station in the capital Lima, carrying 2 bottles of liquid fat, which they claimed were worth up to $36,000 a gallon. At a news conference, police displayed the 2 bottles of fat, which laboratory tests confirmed were indeed human. The illegal selling of ancient bodies continue. Even with the new twist of extraterrestrial creatures, these desecrated bodies, altered and fashioned into the stereotypical aspect of the grey alien, receives significant international interest. An interest that requires media-driven hype and the desperate beliefs by those who want nothing more than for these discoveries to be the ultimate evidence that they exist. Such media frenzies, mixed with lies and deceit, help raise the price of these bodies in the black market. Of course, ultimately, people's huge desire for such things to be ET always comes at a price, as we discovered in Cusco, when we asked about the prices of Maria and the small mummies.
Would they be a considerable value? How much roughly would that collection cost?
Mira, Mario pide $100,000 para cada gris.
Mario pide $100,000 for each.
Right, so $1 million for... So
$1 million
for Maria.
For Maria.
So the large body we've seen tonight, Maria, the cost roughly around that. The value of it is around about $1 million. The smaller ones were valued around about $100,000, obviously.
However, as the English-speaking world was left in awe, non-English-speaking specialists were already looking at the X-ray evidence, specialists in their fields. And both of us tracked their diligent efforts across multiple borders as they had stories to tell. These stories needed to be told. The Russians were not the only specialists looking at the case. Due to language barriers, vital research remained unknown to the mainstream English-speaking community, and just like in Russia, the information was there and ready for the public eye. We had the pleasure of speaking with Alexander Sokolov, a scientific editor and author who graduated from St. Petersburg University with a degree in applied mathematics. Both he and his colleagues, Alexei Bondrev, a paleozoologist and member of OMSK branch of the Russian Geographical Society, and Stanislav Drobshevsky, an anthropologist and member of the Russian branch of the European Anthropological Association and scientific editor at anthropogenesis.ru, currently holding the title of Associate Professor of the Department of Anthropology in Moscow State University. Alexander told us that they received a letter from Dr. Konstantin Korotov, the Russian specialist who appeared on the Gaia production surrounding the mummy discoveries. The contents of the letter appeared on the website, which read, "You may have heard that recently mummies of several humanoids were found in Peru. I happen to be involved in this work, and now the samples of tissue and DNA of these mummies are being studied in a number of organizations in Russia, the USA and Mexico. I am not an expert in anthropology, and would be grateful for the opportunity to discuss this situation with interested specialists." The Russian experts agreed to look at the collected evidence, which included the results of radiocarbon dating and a selection of X-rays, and they quickly got to work. The conclusions of their examinations were sent to Korotov, which unfortunately failed to come to light. After a month and a half, the specialists reached out again to Korotov with no reply. Alexei scanned over the X-rays and was very quickly able to determine the remains were from a collection of dissimilar bones. Stanislav reported fragments of the diaphysis from tubular bones and inverted metacarpal bones turned backwards. In the fingers, along with the phalanges, metacarpal and metatarsal bones were mixed, in complete disorder and in random orientations. He went on to say that the X-ray of Josephine was made up of fragments of bones. The skull, he noted, belonged to a small mammal, which is something our archaeologist from England also noted.
What you're then left with is this rear part of the cranium here, which if you then tilt it slightly back so that you've got the vertical join underneath, you can then build the face onto the front of that. And on one of your photographs, this ridge along the back here, that appeared to have been sort of filed down. They'd made some attempt to reduce that so they could then skin it.
And of course in dogs the cranial ridges are quite
quite
Yes,
common,
you
aren't they?
can see that actually. I'll do it front on here. You can see you've got these two ridges here, which would front the eye sockets on your skull. You've then got this ridge which appears on some of them but not others. And then you've even got this rounded ridge here at the back. What's interesting on yours is that little hole there, that seems to be a bit smaller on some of yours. So it's a different species to this one. On the domestic dogs, this front bit's less substantial. You could quite literally just knock the front off and it wouldn't, you know what I mean? But this still does the same illustration.
Josephine, the Russians claimed, has ribs made of tubular bird bones, and amongst the list of other damaging findings they also noted that the makeshift body had a lower arm made of a humerus bone that is always found in the upper arm. Alexei noted in the report that the ends of the bones had been chopped, which led to a headache for the creators, as this was seen in the lack of symmetry and a failing in functional plausibility. The report made an interesting comment. And unlike recent attempts to convince the world that these creatures were both alive and at one time able to walk, instead they made a very valuable observation. Instead of the long femur bones found in the upper leg, they had inserted a shorter tibia bone found in the lower leg section. The upper broad end of the tibia bone smoothly rubbed against the lower edge of the pelvis, without forming any joint at all. The unhappy creature would not have been able to move its legs. Meanwhile, in France, a programme which aired on the BTLV channel discussed the findings in great detail, and one of the examiners was Dr. Alan Froment, who is a specialist in biological anthropology and head of the anthropology collections at the National Museum of Natural History in Paris.
C'est des os d'animaux assemblés, probablement collés avec une espèce de bitume. Mais là, c'est là qu'on aurait voulu avoir un scanner, c'est pour voir la finesse de tout ce qui pourrait être ligamentaire qu'on ne verra pas puisqu'il n'y a pas de ligament, c'est des pseudo-articulations. Donc ça, on aurait très bien vu au scanner que c'est des fausses articulations. Donc c'est juste des os et il n'y a pas de chair et il y a tout de suite une pellicule par-dessus pour masquer en fait l'assemblage. Mais il n'y a pas... Et alors, du point de vue organe, on voit aucun organe. On voit juste ces trois masses opaques à l'intérieur, mais on voit pas ni cœur, ni poumon, c'est vide.
Hearing from the European specialists clearly and beyond doubt showed the mummies had been manipulated. The bone structures were incorrect, and no matter the efforts from some allegedly serious researchers in Latin America to convince us they were indeed at one time alive and walking around, the truth was very different. They were simply a man-made manipulation of mismatched bones and other material. But what was the other material? The brilliant work on this matter of Rodolfo Salas Gismondi, PhD, who is a member of the Vertebrate Paleontology Department of the Natural History Museum in Lima, was published on a website, discredios.utero.pe. In it, he identified the bones that made up the hand provided by Thierry Jaimín, the president of the Ankara Institute in Cusco. He states Jaime Musan displayed the hand in a contact program on July the 2nd, in which the image showed the hand with 3 fingers. He points out, according to the scholars of Jaime Musan, each finger is made up of 6 phalanges, and the metacarpals, which would make up the palm of the hand, are long, thin, and form a rectangular palm. This analysis is absolutely superficial, incorrect, and is based on the relative position of the bones and not on the morphology of each bone. In the radiography of Thierry's alien hand, the morphological analysis of the bones indicates that each finger is formed by 2 metacarpals and 4 phalanges, and not by 6 phalanges as indicated by the Mexican forensics expert and the rest of Musan's scientists. All these bones are from adult humans. This shocking statement solidifies the fact that these are manufactured artifacts of varying animal and human remains, and are an act which falls neatly into the desecration of human corpse law within many countries around the world, including Peru. Rodolfo's masterful report also states, the hand represented by Paul Roncheros has more than 1 row of human metacarpals, and also metacarpals mixed between the phalanges, and even an upside-down phalanx. None of the hands make anatomical or functional or evolutionary sense, and have clearly been created from more than 1 human individual. Apparently, both hands include bones of an arm and leg of a neonatal individual in the area of the palm of the hand, so I presume the same author built both hands, mixing in each case long bones, ulna, radius, tibia and fibula of neonatal individuals with metacarpals and phalanges of adults. In the report, he also states, according to Jaime Maussan, the hand presented by Thierry Hameen has been dated with carbon-14 as 1200 years of antiquity at the Autonomous University of Mexico. These results are indicators of the archaeological character of the remains used for the construction of this hand. The modifications of the hands of the mummy Maria were also made of archaeological material, which shows a systematic destruction of patrimonial remains in the Nazca area. This harmful activity can be increased if it continues to represent irresponsibly false evidence. The scientists of Jaime Maussan, among them the Peruvian surgeon Edison Salazar and the Mexican coroner José de Sus Salas, have not been able to distinguish metacarpal phalanges. Their convincing statements about the authenticity of the remains are not based on scientific knowledge and leave a bitter taste as to the real reasons behind the brazen farce. A growing number of Peruvian laypeople like Anthony Choi, Guillermo Rento-Legato, Eduardo Pogorelski, Luca McLovin are gathering their voices and are openly attacking online the supporters of the alien hypothesis. They've had enough of their heritage being stripped and manipulated and most of all disrespected. A leaked video interview from Peru by Luca McLovin squarely placed a grenade into the Huaquero enterprise and drew us into a new level of stomach-churning research which exposed where the artifacts were coming from that helped create these elaborate hoaxes. A material runner who had been left hungry and penniless laid out the process and extent of the soul-destroying efforts the Huaqueros have gone to glamour the world.
Corazones de los muertos, así están pellizcaditos con una bolsa con ese calor matándome con hambre, con su madre que traía ahí. Me pagaba una miseria, una huevadita. Pasaba hambre con su madre. ¿Sí cuántas momias traído? Le trajo unas 8 momias más o menos. Chiquitos, fetitos, las veía varias, bastantes veces. Patita, manito de fetitos, salitos, todo conmigo a veces de los nervios, cabeza, cráneo. De verdad que no te... yo aquí me la jugaba, hermano, para tener en este carro esa vaina de chipote que me pega. Piensa en eso, pero yo estoy cojudo de ser consciente. Pero le pego grandeza, al menos pego que me dé algo, pego más que una luquita, pegando y me siento contento. Ahora poco me llamó. Me fue a buscar allá, me dijo, tío, vamos para traer más hueso del diáfano. Ese hueso del diáfano se trabaja.
¿Cómo lo hacemos?
¿La cabeza de trofeo?
No, lo que hizo era los años.
Esa hueá, si para hacer el que no vale un pescuezo nada. No digo que esta hueá del muerto se revite, se pone en el agua así caliente, se vuelve flexible, ve. Lo estiras del pescuezo, le sacas del gañote, le espantas otro gañote nuevo, y queda estirado la hueá más barato del pescuezo. ¿Usted quiere cambiar el cráneo? Y abre, no sé, ahí hueá usted que estaba haciendo esa hueá. Lo abre.
¿Tú has visto que lo hace? ¿Cómo te enseñó?
Y tú pego, yo he visto varias veces para adentro que te vuelve a mandar, le quiero un bracito, pierna, un quinto, nervio te vuelve. Seco, o sangre, no trae sangre, no trae sangre. Cuando me quitan los trapos que están con sangre, esa vaina.
Y sobre los aliens, ¿cómo no viste esas cosas? Los aliens que ha hecho ahora. Los marcianitos, pues.
Ese pegón, marciano, te digo, pegón.
Si son chiquitos.
No, si es un bebito chiquito, porque no tenía esos efectos de él, igualito lo hace. ¿Cómo lo hace? El cráneo lo saca, huevón. Sale suavecito, queda la lonja, el pellejo nomás. ¿Quieres meterle otro cráneo más grande o disfigurado algo adentro? O cabeza de llama, porque no metes 3 llamas. Adentro los metes.
¿Y la cabeza de llama ya no está esto?
Mira ahí, se mete la cabeza.
Ese puede poner.
¿Cómo le trae?
¿Va a servir?
Me hicieron, total que va. Esa vaina se tira la cabeza, le saca el cráneo de adentro, tira la lonja y le mete adentro la cabeza ya. Y esa vaina lo pones a secar, solamente se seca, se arruga la vaina y se pega. Acá también igualito, se pega solito, le sacas esta vaina, no sé, ya no pedalarse ahí, le meto otro compartimiento de este aquí, pero él la metió creo de llama, no sé si es un hueso de llama más grande.
Ahí contaron con los CDs son chiquitos nomás. Sí, pero tiene una video grande.
Suddenly, the realization struck like a freight train. The entire scientific community had been duped, and the need to acquire DNA was nothing more than a smokescreen.
If these bodies were made from multiple parts, DNA became a redundant course due to the varying DNA markers. It would have been causing all sorts of anomalous readings. But it was a course of action that had been used to tag along the public and scientific community. The efforts to complicate the procurement of DNA for analysis became very clear. The constant requests for compensation from those holding the body, strangely enough, did not come from the vaqueros and resulted in a large amount of dollars being paid in cash. It soon became clear, enough was never enough.
Our sources stated that the bodies were part of a production line, a factory, as you would call, based in Palpa and not Nazca. A well-funded and supplied factory of animal and human body parts produced a product which attempted to fool the world.
Peruvian investigator Anthony Choi began to expose the comings and goings in Palpa, a town abandoned by the state and described as a powerhouse to the vaquero black market. Recent underground communications to both Steve and I stated that the factory contained thousands of various fake artifacts, and most disturbingly, a communication stated the human was not ready for release. So it would seem the world is about to be drip-fed more fake artifacts, and the interest in Mera, the original human and vaquero-inspired hybridization, has led to another possible release of a desecrated human ancestor of the Peruvian people, driven by the greed for millions of dollars.
So what does all this mean? Thousands of dollars spent, hundreds of man-hours exhausted in the effort to understand what the actual bodies were that were presented to us in Cusco. Not only our efforts, but the others who across the scientific community have placed their names and their faces behind the findings within their DNA tests. With the admission of multiple body parts, both human and animal, it simply means the DNA tests, all the DNA tests, are worthless.
During the press announcement in Lima, Peru in 2017, Steve and I were in attendance to record what was deemed as a most monumentous change in our perception of this planet and our place in the universe. Inside sources have revealed many of the culprits of the elaborate hoax were there in attendance to witness the fruit of their efforts. Peruvian investigations lay out the trail of modified human and animal remains, beginning with those presented by an individual identified as Crowix. He appears to hide his identity in early videos, but later reveals his face clearly and his name, which we know now as Paul Roncheros. Feuding, however, between those on the ground level seemed to hold up the release of more material, but finally, a vaquero known as Mario allegedly released some bodies to the Incari Institute in Cusco, an arduous journey of over 300 miles over the Andes. Whereas it would have made more sense to have the bodies appear in Nazca, the alleged location of the cave, which was only 26 miles southeast of Palpa. But an elaborate story needed an elaborate plan. Roncheros broke his silence and made claims that the smaller alien heads were nothing more than carved dog skulls. A reveal which corresponded with our own findings through Mark Ollie, the English archaeologist. However, as Roncheros was part of the mass illusion, the boy that cried wolf was not heard. Both Jaime Maussan and Gaia TV brought the story to the wider world through the testimony of Dr. Konstantin Koraktov, whose background was questionable. He himself admitted in a letter to his native specialists, "I am not an expert in anthropology."
Значит, я понял, вопрос был, как долго я пытался сообщить Константину Короткову, что это фейк, да?
Да, и сколько долго вы знали это, да.
Значит, Константин Коротков связался со мной в начале, at the beginning of September last year. And 1 month and 1.5 I tried to talk to Konstantin to tell him that this is fake in my letters. There was about 5 letters. So Konstantin asked that he is not specialized, he can't understand it, that's all. После чего я выждал где-то месяц, I waited for 1 month, and then I decided to publish this information at my website. То есть я месяц ждал, и в начале ноября, at the beginning of November, about 2nd November, we free this information. Мы опубликовали эту информацию на нашем сайте. То есть где-то прошло, то есть в начале сентября со мной связался Коротков, и в начале ноября мы это опубликовали. Поскольку я понял, что наша экспертиза...
He received the results of the analysis by the Russian team, but this information was not forthcoming to the public. Clearly the pain of the Peruvian people toward the butchering and manipulation of both remains of men, women and children needs to stop. The continuing brazen attempts to alter this hoax as being anything else serves to fuel the Vaqueros' greed and continuation of this gruesome production of fake history and artifacts, and should be halted immediately. Further video productions publicising and promoting this fiasco need to be stopped immediately. Without the mainstream media, these inhumane acts will eventually dry out. Steve and I have collected the evidence and placed it here for all to see. The rabbit hole goes very deep and is very dangerous for those in the ground level to report, as you would expect. Millions of dollars have been made from illegal archaeology, and no doubt it will be something for the Peruvian people to fix. In conclusion, we wish to thank all the hard work delivered to both Steve and I from the French, Russian, English and Peruvian teams. Our support continues for those in Peru who continue to bring light to this horrible act against the Peruvian people and their history.